So we've all heard about the funding constraints around the NDIS. We know from our previous podcast that the NDIS is truly the most revolutionary scheme to support people with disability in the world. But it's currently undergoing a lot of changes, which are creating a lot of uncertainty for people with disability and the people who care for them. And some of those inflexibilities are having dreadful impacts on people, including the fact that some people have died because their current funding arrangement doesn't recognise the changes. That's right, isn't it, Alison?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, yes, Nicky.
Yeah. So I'm Nicky Sloan. I'm coming to you from the beautiful lands of the Dharawal people to bring you Community Matters, the podcast that discusses issues important in our community with the people who are making a difference. And today I'm joined by Alison Oyston, who is the manager of a wonderful organisation called Illawarra Advocacy. Welcome.
Thank you, Nicky. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, pleasure. And I think, first of all, it'd be great if you would explain a little bit about Illawarra Advocacy and the amazing work that you do.
Absolutely. Thank you. So Illawarra Advocacy has been around for 35 years. We've celebrated our 35-year anniversary this year. We provide free and independent disability advocacy services to people with disabilities spanning a geographical footprint that extends from Helensburgh to Batemans Bay and out to the Southern Highlands. We have 2 funded programs. We're federally funded. So we assist people through our general advocacy service, that's the National Disability Advocacy Program, and also NDIS Appeals, which is a specific program to assist people with disability to pursue appeals in the Administrative Review Tribunal for unfavourable plans that they may have received, or if they're trying to access the NDIS and they've been unsuccessful.
Wow. A free service supporting people with disability and their families to access the supports they need. Wonderful. What amazing work you do. So I spoke a little bit at the start about the inflexibility and the changes and the uncertainty that's going on at the moment. Could you explain a little bit about what's happening and what the impact is?
Sure, Nicky. I would say the last 12 months for people with disability, particularly in the Illawarra region, has been one of the most difficult of recent history. We've got a convergence of factors that's really affected people with disability, an acute local housing crisis, coupled with a cost of living crisis. We've also seen real challenges with the NDIS, ever shifting sort of goalposts, for which people with disability are really struggling. And in addition to that, we've also seen problems with accessing advocacy services generally. So advocacy services across the nation are struggling with the influx of demand that we've experienced, including our own. And we've had to implement a waiting list, which has been really difficult for us. And it's really impacting people with disability generally because they can't access the support that they really need to navigate these difficult times.
Because the NDIS, although it is a world-beating scheme, it is quite difficult to navigate, isn't it, unless you've got a good, strong advocate?
Absolutely. Yes, it's very difficult. And I think over the course of the last 12 months, we've seen some really significant changes that has really impacted upon the need for independent advocacy to help navigate those changes that have impacted people with disability so significantly. So one of those changes related to the transitional rules that rolled out in October last year, and those rules really stipulate what is and is not an NDIS support, and that's been very challenging for a lot of people with disability who have been used to perhaps using their plan in a more flexible way, and they've now had to sort of re-educate themselves and around what they can and can't use their supports for, and that's been very, very challenging. Additionally, we've also seen the introduction of funding periods in May this year, And that has really changed the landscape of the provision of disability services, both from a provider perspective, and also increased the risk to participants in light of those sort of restricted drip feed style plans that we're now seeing. So it's been a very, very challenging time. And at the same time, we're also seeing support coordination services being weaned off. People with disability are being encouraged to consult with their local area coordinators. And whilst they're wonderful, they're also really overloaded. And so there are a lot of people with disability at the moment who are struggling and really require our support to help them through these really uncertain times.
So we know when the NDIS was first established, and it was really established on those principles of reasonable and necessary supports. And we're seeing quite rapidly the changes in what's being deemed reasonable and necessary.
That's right. And I think that the element of choice and control that underpins the scheme as well has been scaled back as a consequence of these transitional rules. A lot of people with disability feel that their choice and control over how they're spending their plans has been removed or changed significantly. That's been really, really challenging for them.
And we're hearing, and we just heard today actually about, some decisions that seem quite ridiculous, to be quite frank, where somebody who wants to be able to cook for themselves and requires something like a Thermomix, which would be able to do some of the chopping and things that they're not able to do, and instead have been allocated a support worker to come and cook for them. Mm-hmm. And I just think in terms of reasonable and necessary and choice and control and support for independent living, those decisions must be very challenging for the person with disability. Are they the kinds of things that people come to you about?
Absolutely, yes. So those reasonable and necessary supports and challenging decisions that the agency has made about those comprise a really large proportion of the matters that our organisation assists with. So we challenge internal review decisions that relate to those supports in the Administrative Review Tribunal. And over the course of the last financial year, our organisation assisted 106 people to challenge those decisions. And that, just by way of context, is about 77% above our funded target.
Wow.
And that represented a 26% increase on even our already overinflated service that we provided last year in terms of numbers of people seeking support. So it's been a really difficult time. We've also trying to assist people to exercise their rights in that space, but also support them through what a lot of people with disability describe as a David and Goliath battle. So in the Administrative Review Tribunal, the agency briefs lawyers. So people with disability, if they don't have an advocate, are facing lawyers on their own, and they find that process very intimidating. They frequently describe the process as being brutal and dehumanising, despite the best efforts of registrars at the tribunal, who are really fantastic, and they recognise that it's not a level playing field for everyone, but it still is, despite its best efforts, quite an adversarial, litigious process for people with disability. And if they don't have someone there to advocate for them, it's really very hard. I've had a recent applicant in the tribunal who is studying her PhD. She's an incredibly intelligent, capable woman, and she described feeling broken through the process, that it was just far too difficult for her to navigate on her own. It also related to her son, so there's that additional element of it being very raw, and without our support, she has said she would not have been able to get the matter over the line, notwithstanding how incredibly capable she was. And if that's someone who is, has that level of intelligence and, functionality to sort of pursue matters through that space, you can only imagine what other people who perhaps don't have the same level of cognitive capacity or, functionality experience. So without an advocate, it's very, very difficult.
Wow. Well, that is amazing work that you're doing, because I know I would find it incredibly intimidating to go up in front of a tribunal, but then facing lawyers would be incredibly difficult. So, and 77% above your funded target. How on earth are you managing to deliver?
That's an excellent question. So, across our two programs, so if we combine the NDIS appeals with our NDAP program, the General Advocacy Program, we supported 388 clients over the course of the last financial year, and that collectively is 80% above our target. So we're a tiny team. There's 6 of us in total, of which I'm the only full-time employee, and we are really under the pump. My team are really very exceptionally skilled and experienced advocates. One of our advocates, Bronwyn Leonhardt, has been with us for 18 years, and she has such a wealth of knowledge and experience. And I think that's what really sets our organisation apart, is that depth of community knowledge that's born over the course of those 35 years. So we're able to really attend to matters efficiently, escalate matters where required, because we've developed a really trusted partner network over the course of that time. So we have partners within housing, trustee and guardian, Office of the Public Guardian, a whole host, our wonderful MPs, Alison Burns and Carol Berry, who support us regularly, and having those points of contact where we can escalate matters really allows us to achieve exceptional outcomes for our clients. And we wouldn't have that were it not for the fact that we've been around for so long, and that we're also place-based. And I think that's a really important consideration, because we live in the community and we understand the community well, and we have those close ties within the community that serves people with disability best. So those sort of smaller community-based advocacy organisations across Australia can all speak to the need for retaining those services rather than transplanting one-size-fits-all style approach to advocacy that doesn't necessarily have that same level of community sort of knowledge and reputation.
So once again, this is an example of where government funding is actually inadequate for the services that are needed, and no doubt another not-for-profit is delivering over and above what they are really funded to do, and no doubt is relying on the volunteer support of people who are delivering more than they're being paid to deliver.
Yeah,
yes?
No, absolutely. And we are very fortunate to have a team that are willing to go above and beyond for our clients. For us, it's an honour and a privilege to do this work, and we're very, very passionate about it. So we definitely deliver over and above what we're funded to do, because we consider that to be an incredible honour to be involved in this work.
Wow, that's very inspiring. We've talked a lot about the issues and the difficulties. What do you see as some of the solutions? What would you like to see if you had a magic wand?
I would love to see foundational supports for people with disability. I think that's a huge part of the problem at the moment. I think we have what I would describe as a perfect storm for people with disability right now. So with all of the challenges that I've described, it's sort of an all or nothing situation where you either get on the NDIS and you can access support, or you don't, and there is nothing really. We do have some time-limited supports which are really excellent. So Carer Gateway is a great example. But we need more than that. And people who aren't getting on the NDIS at the moment, particularly those who perhaps have a physical disability that's really quite debilitating, but it's falling short of meeting the very high threshold to get on the NDIS, they have nothing. Often they require assistance for, in a domestic setting, and also with their gardening and general sort of maintenance of their house. And often they have children that they're trying to support as well, and they're bedridden. We have no other supports, particularly locally, for people with disability that fit into those categories. So I think foundational supports need to be introduced as a matter of urgency. And that's something that we saw as soon as the NDIS rolled out. The states that previously had supports of that nature sort of handed the reins over to the NDIS. And I totally understand where Minister Shorten was saying the NDIS shouldn't be the only oasis in the desert. And I think Minister Butler described that as the only port in the storm. Mm-hmm. And at the moment, this perfect storm that people with disability are experiencing means that the NDIS is literally the only port for them in the storm. There is really nothing else, and we need to address that as a matter of urgency.
Yeah, because sadly what we see is if people don't have the supports they need, they end up actually in the health system.
They do, yes.
And that isn't actually the most appropriate place.
Totally. And it's excellent that you mentioned that, Nicky, because we're seeing the complexity of matters coming our way this year has really heightened. So we're seeing a lot of intersections with different supports and different services. So for example, one of the areas that we're seeing the NDIA clawing back supports on is ratios of support for people with plans. People that are receiving one-to-one ratios at, say, a 24/7 level are often coming to us with their ratios now. The agency has formed the view that they could perhaps share supports despite the fact that their disability hasn't changed and they haven't built capacity to share with someone else. And in those situations, often, plans are overutilised because they've continued to expend their plans at that rate. And that then brings them into the possibility of a social admission to hospital because their plans have been completely overutilised. It places participants in enormous danger, and it also implicates service providers as well, who have a really impossible decision to make around continuing to support a participant that they know requires that 24/7 one-to-one support and carrying a debt as a consequence of that they may never see those funds realised in the future, or they withdraw their services and leave the participant with the prospect of potentially going to hospital. And that's not fair on the participants, the providers, the hospital. It's just a situation that should be remedied at the agency end through a fuller understanding of participants' needs. I think one of the fundamental flaws that we have with the agency is the fact that they actually never meet with a participant in person. They never gain an understanding of what their support needs are by sitting down, getting to know them, getting an understanding of what their living circumstances look like. They're gleaning information from reports that they're perhaps in some circumstances not fully understanding, nor are they necessarily qualified to actually understand the content of the reports that those participants have gone to a lot of trouble to actually commission in the first place. So there's a lot of danger inherent in the current sort of circumstances that we're seeing for people with disability at the moment. And we're really screaming risk from the rooftops at our organisation, because people with disability are suffering as a consequence of all of these changes and difficulties that they've experienced this year. And their health, safety and well-being has been impacted. And in fact, we have seen a death this year that is purely as a result of a plan that was not funded appropriately.
Oh, that is tragic. That is tragic. And you talk about risk, and it's really clear that often providers are having to take risk to be able to support people. They're either taking a financial risk, or they're taking an actual risk, a physical risk to that person. That's completely unacceptable.
Absolutely. And we're also finding, whilst most providers do the right thing, a lot of providers have been used to overutilising plans for participants. They've often utilised those plans at, say, a 1-to-1 ratio when the plans were never intended to be implemented at that rate. And it may well be in the absence of any clinical justification for providing that ratio of support. And I think it's a whole new ballgame now for providers and participants. So there's a lot of intersections too with consumer law. That sort of debts arising that potentially fall onto participants in the absence of funding too. So it's really important for participants to be aware when they're entering service agreements that they are contractual. Again, that highlights the importance of understanding the risk at the moment, understanding whether or not those participants even have the capacity to enter into agreements of that nature, whether they understand them. There is a whole lot of dangers at the moment. And again, that just highlights the need for ensuring that they have access to free and independent advocacy support.
Yes, absolutely. I think many of us would struggle to understand these contracts that people are signing into, particularly those people are often in very stressful situations as well.
By way of example of the investment that the agency has placed on defending matters in the Administrative Review Tribunal, over the course of the last 12 months, the investment in private law firms is in the magnitude of $60 million.
$60 million that the agency's invested in private law firms to defend in the tribunal.
That's right, yes. And that represents a 60% increase on the year before. So it's incrementally increasing. And that sort of money, when we're talking about matters where applicants generally have findings made in their favour, either matters resolve or they receive favourable decisions from the tribunal in over 70% of cases. Wow. So it's really mind-boggling, and I think it really begs the question why we're spending that sort of money, and would we not be better investing that money into the agency to ensure that the decisions that are coming out of the agency reflect what people with disability truly need, hire the staff with the qualifications to be appropriately assessing the evidence before them, and ensuring that we're really meeting people's needs appropriately, rather than dragging them through such a brutal process in which they ultimately usually are successful in getting what they wanted in the first place. Are we not better served really re-examining where we're investing our money? I'm sure there's a lot of Australian taxpayers that would be very concerned by those sort of statistics, and the number of matters before the tribunal in the 12 months up to the 30th of June was in the order of 7,000 matters.
Right. So government we're hearing all the time about the incremental growth in the NDIS and the cost and the Australian budget of the NDIS. But we're investing $60 million in private law firms to effectively lose the majority of cases. It does sound a little bit like we've lost our way, and that does sound like something that really needs a bit of a rethink. And I think back to a previous podcast episode where we talked about the NDIS and said it's called the National Disability Insurance Scheme, but really it should be called the National Disability Investment Scheme, because we are investing in people with disability, in their lives and in their ability to be part of our community.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We've talked around such a range of issues today. Is there anything that you haven't had the opportunity to say that you'd really like to discuss?
I think I'd just highlight the importance of ensuring that people with disability know that there are free independent advocacy services that they can access, albeit that most of them have a capacity cap at the moment, but that service exists, and it's a service that has been highlighted by both the Disability Royal Commission and the recent NDIS review as a service that is vital. It's a vital component of the system, and it's really important that it's funded appropriately. And I think longer term, the government is looking at addressing the funding deficiencies that we have at present. But people with disability should always be able to reach out to someone who will stand up for their rights, ensure that their voices are heard. Some of our most vulnerable community members don't have a voice if they don't come to us and allow us to ensure that their rights are upheld. So it's really important that the investment in independent advocacy continues into the future, so that people with disability who are already facing so much uncertainty at least have the security of knowing that there is someone who will be in their corner, that they can call upon, that won't cost them anything, and that's independent. We're not affiliated with the NDIS nor providers, so our sole objective is to ensure the best possible outcomes for those people. So it's a service that I think we just need to ensure that the community in the Illawarra, Shoalhaven and South Coast that we service knows that we exist. But more generally speaking, that people with disability know that these services exist across Australia, and hopefully will continue to do so in the future.
Yes, I think some of that $60 million that we're investing in private law firms could go a long way to increasing the capacity of these free services for people with disability.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Alison, this podcast is called Community Matters. Can you tell us about someone in the community that matters to you?
Sure. So I've spoken a lot about people with disability, but people like Lily Piccolo, who we had as a guest speaker at our recent Illawarra Advocacy, recently had a fundraiser to celebrate our 35th anniversary. And Lily Piccolo is a vision-impaired para-athlete. And Lily reminded us of the importance of celebrating disability instead of all of the negative language that we have around disability, including the use of the term disabled. It's a less than language, and we should be celebrating all of the wonderful abilities that people with disability have. Lily's choice of language was diverse ability, and I think that's fantastic. There are so many diverse ways that people with disability continue to show us how incredible they are, and I think that we need to really take on board what Lily had to say in that regard. Diverse ability sounds like a much better option than disability to me.
Absolutely, and I think when we think about inclusion, how much we all grow as people when we are more inclusive.
Absolutely,
of people
that's
with
right.
all of those diverse abilities.
Yes, that's so true.
Yes. Thank you so much, Alison. That's been an amazing discussion. I've learnt so much. I'm sure we've all learnt so much, and thank you for being with us today, but mostly thank you and your team for the amazing work that you do at Illawarra Advocacy. Thank you all for tuning in today for Community Matters, the podcast that explores community issues with the people making a difference. Please like us, share, leave us a review, and tune in next time as we discuss another issue on Community Matters.